Hello everyone, welcome to How to Become a Successful Expat 101. Today we will be preparing you for your expatriate voyage to Singapore.
Understanding a country's history is an important part to comprehending its culture as a whole. It helps an expat understand and relate to the foreign country or culture that they're in. Within a generation, Singapore went from a tiny island nation with little to no natural resources to a nation with the 7th highest GDP per capita in the world, and it's largely considered to be one of the most economically free markets on earth. So how exactly did Singapore go about this?
Since Singapore gained its independence from Malaysia in 1965, the tiny island nation has taken an unorthodox approach to governing and economic development that has helped it succeed. With no natural resources, Singapore had to rely heavily on international trade. Its new government cracked down hard on corruption, lowered corporate taxes, and made it extremely easy to start a business. English was made the official language of the country in an effort to unify the diverse nation and spur trade and investment with Western nations. None of this was completed without challenges, though. In order to make the country so business-friendly, personal freedoms of Singaporean citizens were sacrificed, high taxes were placed on consumer goods, and extremely strict laws were created. A Hofstede analysis helps to understand how the history of Singapore affects the nation across 4 important cultural dimensions.
Power distance. Compared to Canada, Singapore scores highly in this dimension at 74. For expats, this means that the power is more centralized and managers rely more heavily on rules and their superiors to make decisions and dictate behavior. Individualism. Singapore scores quite low at 20, meaning that they are a collectivist society where the whole is more important than the individual. This is reflected in their communication style, where conflicts are avoided in order to maintain group harmony. This is important for expats to remember, as it means that the conversations are more indirect, as in a yes is not necessarily a yes, as relationships take priority over task fulfillment. Uncertainty avoidance. Singapore scores extremely low in this dimension at 8. Society rejects ambiguity and instead prefers well-enforced rules and regulations. This may prove to be a more difficult area of adjustment for expats from countries that rank more highly, as they are more comfortable and welcoming of new ideas or technology, for example. Long-term orientation. Like other Asian countries, Singapore scores quite highly at 72. This means Singaporeans value qualities such as perseverance, sustained efforts, and frugality with resources. Expat managers should try to reflect this in their preferences for long-term benefits in their rewarding of employees through intrinsic rewards, more so than they might for employees in North America.
And now we're going to move on to the segment that focuses on communication, starring Daniel and Larry.
Expats should be aware that although Singapore is dominantly Chinese, the nation-state has 4 official languages: Malay, Mandarin, Tamil, and English. However, English is widely used as the common language because of its neutrality as well as its importance in the international business arena. Singaporeans mix all of these languages, creating Singlish. Singlish is how Singaporeans speak, and expats tend to find it challenging to understand. For instance, locals often add the word la at the end of every sentence, and they would also say can instead of yes. We encourage you to be patient, as it will take you some time to adjust, but the language barriers are very minimal.
So my name is Tim. I'm a Year 4 student at NUS, the National University of Singapore, a marketing major, and I've thus far had experience working in FMCG. So when talking about working with international colleagues and some of the differences that may arise, a couple of examples come to mind, but the clearest and most recent one I think is working for my current boss. So he's a Korean man, and so English isn't his first language, and we get along fine in every other aspect, but because English isn't his first language, the tone and inflection he kind of takes to a sentence isn't what I might expect. And so there have been a couple of times now where he's asked a question and I thought it was a rhetorical question, and so he'd finish his question and I kind of sit there and go, yeah, expecting the sentence to be over, expecting the conversation to be over, but he'd be waiting for a response. So he'd go, no, why? Like, answer me. And the net result of it is I end up looking like a dud. And it's not just happened once, it's happened a couple of times, and I've tried to learn from it, but really just because of the tone and inflection he takes, it's kind of kept me guessing. And at first I thought it was just me, but I've checked with a couple of other local colleagues, like Singaporean colleagues, and it happens to them as well. So I'm not like a complete idiot. Yeah, peace.
Research shows that North Americans are explicit in their speech by conveying meaning through words, whereas Singaporeans tend to be indirect in their communication. As in many Asian cultures, no is a difficult word to use in order to express disagreement. Singaporean hint a point rather than making a direct statement. Expats should avoid making direct statement or calling people out as is it reduces Singaporean social standing, reputation, dignity, and honor. We, as Canadians, tend to disagree openly, but in Singapore, disagreement is often avoided through vagueness and substitution as it impacts their harmony and situation and causes individual to lose faces. For example, expats should expect to hear, "I think about it," or "that might be difficult," as a form of disagreement. And oftentimes, "yes" might means "I have understand your point" rather than "I agree with you."
Before negotiation starts, Singaporeans like to build trust and create strong relations before getting down to business. During meetings, expats should never show the bottom of their feet, and this is because the foot is considered to be the lowest part of the body and it is thought to be unclean. It is better to sit with your feet flat against the floor to ensure that you do not accidentally offend anyone. Also, tapping your foot or fidgeting your leg denotes lack of interest. Expats should never signal or point at a person with their forefinger and should not pound their fist on an open palm because it is considered to be obscene. Lastly, Singaporeans often trust non-verbal messages more than spoken words, so silence is a key element of Singaporean communication.
Many expats have noted that adjusting to life in Singapore is quite smooth. In fact, in 2017, Singapore was noted the best country in the world for expats to live and work. Although there are many great things about living in Singapore, it's important to prepare yourself for all the struggles that you may face, especially in your first few weeks. You and your family may experience something known as culture shock. This is when there is a disequilibrium between the realities of a new culture versus the expectations based on the old. This may make you question your behavioral habits and lead to anxiety, stress, and confusion. Unfortunately, culture shock is unavoidable. However, this section will help you better prepare for your new adjustments. Family considerations are very important when preparing for your move overseas. The move can especially be hard on your spouse, and it can be stressful raising children in an unfamiliar setting. Although raising children in another country can be stressful, many families have stated that Singapore is actually an ideal place to raise your family, as there is a low crime rate and it is very safe and clean. It is also full of culture, food, and art, and it is a very accepting and friendly place for children to grow up. Singapore's high-quality education system will also help alleviate some of the stresses of raising children overseas. There are a number of international schools that are separated by country and follow similar curriculums and holiday schedules of the home country. Children can also experience culture shock and may initially miss old school friends or dislike new foods. The international schools will help your children to transition very smoothly into life in Singapore while still keeping close ties to their home country. Singapore has a wide range of foods for young children to choose from, and you will still have new access to comforting old Western foods. Additionally, having a solid network of friends to help you and your family during your first few weeks overseas is very important. There's a large expatriate community and support system in Singapore that will help you and your family settle in quickly. We strongly encourage you to start developing a friend network even before you've moved to Singapore. Make an effort to get to know the locals, as local friends can act as cultural translators and help you make sense of any cultural habits that you are struggling with. One of the biggest adjustments for expats living in Singapore is the cost. Singapore is ranked the most expensive place to live in the world. This is mostly due to high rental prices. The closer you are to the city center, the more expensive rent will be. International schools for children are also very expensive. However, most companies offer housing stipends and reimbursement for private schools. Also, it is highly recommended to take public transit rather than to drive, as it is efficient, cheap, and easy to use and will drastically reduce expenses as cars can be very expensive. Keep in mind that although Singapore does have a higher cost of living, this is matched with a higher level of income. Overall, Singapore is a very safe place. However, this comes with some strict rules. Make sure to touch upon some rules so you are not caught getting a fine. For example, smoking, eating, or drinking on public transportation, littering, spitting, or chewing gum can all lead to a heavy fine.
For any individual tasked with managing others, establishing a strong foundation premised on fundamentals such as trust and mutual understanding is key to securing long-term success. We will cover two of the most important problem areas, providing practical solutions based on proven techniques backed by authoritative research. Let us begin with the secret sauce, trust. As Canadians, studies show we tend to develop trust cognitively. In essence, we tend to trust others who are competent and accredited, like doctors, even if we don't know them personally. The majority of your colleagues are likely to be Chinese, which means they tend to create and grow trust in very different ways than we are traditionally accustomed to. Research shows that Chinese tend to build trust that is largely derived from their relationships with people. Translation: your impressive credentials won't be sufficient to get you into your new employee's circle of trust. Chinese relationship building is a highly participative process. It tends to be very time-consuming, so patience and perseverance are vital ingredients. This process occurs both on the job through demonstrating your competency and professionalism to your employees during work, while also displaying your genuine desire to develop a relationship outside of work. So try talking to your employees out for lunch and avoid discussions that directly pertain to business, as Singaporeans tend to be passionate about their food and such topics would tend to spoil the exercise of dining. Now we will proceed to discuss the inevitable disagreement. Disagreement is not necessarily a bad thing. Its virtue is predicated on its outcome. Research conducted by Myers asserts the way we disagree productively is largely based upon the ways in which we deal with confrontation, and that countries can be placed on a confrontational to non-confrontational scale. For you, our soon-to-be expat managers, as Canadians, we tend towards those confrontational countries. We see open debate and disagreement as a positive and productive method for refining a team's ideas. Singaporeans tend to see open disagreement and debate as destructive to the idea of team cohesiveness. Data shows that this is typically the case with Chinese persons. So, how can you moderate this? Well, try, for example, to skip the meetings that require intense debate. Your absence will make those in attendance more comfortable to discuss the topic at hand. This holds true for several reasons. As mentioned by Perry, Singapore tends to have a high level of hierarchy. Consequently, your presence as an authority figure would strongly incentivize the locals to stay quiet and defer to your opinion. At first it may seem odd, even wrong, but research shows it works. And now you're all ready to live a successful expat life. Thank you, and until next time, La.